It's an extraordinary honor to be amongst the leaders to my right. Today's conversation is focused on the new and unconventional ways in which leaders today are influencing the political and policy dialogue. Influence truly has been democratized. Never before have there been more opportunities for each of us, all of us, and individuals around the world to have a voice in the political agenda, in some cases positive and in some cases destructive. This presents a wide variety of obstacles. It also provides many new opportunities for us as leaders, not only to adapt to these trends, but to also be change agents ourselves without having to necessarily run for political office, be in an elected position, or be in the traditional roles to influence policy. So with that, I'd like to welcome my panelists, each representing different spheres of influence that can offer perspectives on the tools and the communities and the ways to engage national dialogue today. Secretary Napolitano, a special thanks for you being here. I wanted to thank you for your extraordinary leadership during the Boston bombings. It's times like these that we are reminded why this country needs great leaders, but also we are reminded by the new challenges and the increasingly complicated challenges that leaders are facing. And your department and your role was created precisely because of that. Today, now more than ever, we have new threats to this country, both traditional threats, but also whether it be cybersecurity, whether it be freelance threats and the like, ones that we don't know about. Now this power has been diffused in extraordinary ways. How do you, as a leader, navigate this very disruptive and uncertain time?
Well, I think you're right. There are new and changing threats all the time. And our goal is to keep the United States and Americans safe and secure, but also recognize that we can never eliminate all risk. We have to minimize where we can and then maximize our resilience, maximize our ability to bounce right back and get on with our daily work. So I've taken this huge department that I have the privilege of leading, the third largest department now of the federal government, about 240,000 strong, and really set forth, say, look, we need to really focus on what are our primary missions, counterterrorism, border security, immigration. We're heavily involved in and supportive of comprehensive immigration reform. Cybersecurity, our fastest growing area where we are being attacked and our critical infrastructure is being attacked hourly. And then disaster response. So many of you all were here during Hurricane Sandy and its aftermath. The storm came right up into the harbor, the most densely populated part of the United States, but it actually covered an area the size of Western Europe. So being able to coordinate that response from the federal side, linking up with our local partners, it was also a key role. So I think in terms of leadership, one of the key things is to keep your eye on some long-term vision, even while you're dealing with the daily crisis du jour. I'm like many of you, I make little to-do lists, particularly Sunday night for Monday morning. My staff loves Monday morning. But, I get, it's the unusual day where I actually spend it just doing the things I thought I would be doing. Things come in. You got to deal with them. You've got to manage them. But keeping yourself focused on a broader vision, a longer-term set of goals, and then keeping the people with you focused on those goals. I think that's key.
Beth, you in your work at Ernst & Young helped to oversee public policy, and very much so on a global basis, whether it be from a regulatory tax perspective, whether it be advocating for entrepreneurs and the like. And many companies, many CEOs no longer are acting as sole agents. In order to be effective leaders, they have more constituents than ever before to deal with. And Washington and that intersection between the private and public sector is becoming increasingly important, but oftentimes increasingly more complicated. From that perspective, how are business leaders wielding power differently in DC? And is it the way that they should be?
That's a great question, Maura. I actually think it is different than it used to be. I'm not sure as effective. I actually think the era of Enron and WorldCom changed the dynamic and changed it severely in that that became a period where all CEOs were just criticized and not held in high esteem, and their sort of stature has fallen ever since. Politicians likewise, but it has caused everybody in some sense to go into the bunker, put their head down, and disengage with each other. And I think that public-private sector cooperation, I know from my time in the government, that was the one thing I saw so vividly, was that the private sector doesn't understand the motivations of the public sector very well, and the public sector doesn't understand the motivations of the private sector very well. So it's hard for the two sides to work together. It takes a lot of effort, but I see less of that effort to some extent today. And I think in part because business is more complicated. As you said, those CEOs, the global nature of those roles has them all over the world. The demands on them across a multiplicity of stakeholders means they just have so much on their plate. They don't spend the time, say, in Washington that they used to. And so it's one step removed. And I don't think that that's actually healthy. I also think there's another dynamic that I see, is that politicians at times need air cover to make the tough decisions, to do the tough things. And CEOs can speak out to call for things that are needed to, in essence, give the politicians air cover to do what they need to do without being thrown out of office. And you sort of need both dynamics. And I don't see as much of that going on either as well. And I just think those things are important. I guess the other thing that I then see is because of social media and because of the immediacy of information, politicians then don't have the space to make the deals they need to make. Everything is so open and transparent that there's sometimes less opportunity for the length of time it takes to actually move things through a process.
So while social media and technology may have created new opportunities for voices to emerge, often they can be distracting, and they can often cloud the opportunities to move forward the critical issues that need to get done. That being said, though, social media and technology is empowering new constituencies in unprecedented ways. And Kristen, you work for the Winston Group, an opinion research firm in Washington. You're a millennial, you're also a Republican, so you're sort of a constituent that was talked about a lot in the last election cycle. How is the millennial generation engaging in this political dialogue, and what are they looking for from leaders in terms of outreach, but also the tools that you need to be change agents in your communities?
So, as a young Republican, it's no secret that sort of my numbers are dwindling. I came to be very sort of engaged in this issue back around 4 years ago when the exit polls came out and showed that my generation had broken very heavily for one party over the other, and it was not for my party. And I had many friends who thought, you know, how can you possibly be Republican? That's not just, doesn't just make you wrong, it makes you a bad person. And I found myself having to fight this battle constantly of explaining what it was that I believed in.
It's okay, you have a friend here, it's okay.
But I found that this party that I supported was not connecting very well with my generation. So over the last 4 years, I've been very focused on what are the values that my generation holds, how are we consuming information, and how can I try to use my influence to shape my party and sort of bring them into the 21st century. Through that, I've done a lot of research, some surveys and focus groups of young millennial voters to find out what they want. In the sort of aftermath of this most recent election, there's been a lot of talk in Republican circles about how do we become the cool party again? And I'm finding more and more that I'm having to tell people that that's the wrong question to be asking. In these focus groups, we would talk to young voters a lot about the things they cared about, and we did a survey where before we asked any political questions, we said, what are the 2 or 3 words you most wish your friends would use to describe you? And we gave them this laundry list that they could choose from on the screen. It was words like open-minded, tolerant, cool, unique, rich, lots of different words. And the 3 words that were chosen the most often wasn't cool, it wasn't unique, it wasn't adventurous. It was intelligent, caring, and hardworking. I think there's a real opportunity there. If these are the values that are the most important to my generation, there's a huge opportunity, I think, for my party, I think for folks of all sorts of different political affiliations and movements to reach millennials by tapping into those values, by demonstrating that you care about intelligence, caring, hardworking. When it comes to the question of social media, the other challenge with my generation is we don't trust a lot of what we hear. When you put that political ad on television, it's 30 seconds long and it's dark and it's spooky and it says, don't vote for this person because they don't like puppies. Those ads, they don't work with my generation at all. And while they still consume the vast majority of most campaign budgets, in general, surveys show that my generation doesn't have much trust in the media, and we certainly don't have a lot of trust in political advertisements, and unfortunately not a lot of trust in political leaders. But we do trust our friends and family, and that's what makes social media so essential, I think, to communicating with millennials. When you post an ad on television, my generation's not necessarily going to believe it. If you post it online, and your supporters who are young share it on Facebook, they're sort of putting their own good housekeeping seal of approval on it. They're saying, I believe in this. This is something that I think is important. And when they share it, it then has this extra level of credibility to it when it finally hits the eyeballs of someone who's not as politically engaged. What makes social media so useful is it's allowing people to share content that is important to them, to share content that they think makes them look intelligent and caring and hardworking. And it gives it that extra layer of credibility that other sort of content doesn't necessarily have these days.
Secretary, I'd be curious to hear your reaction to those feedbacks and insights. So much of the work that you do is not only keeping this country safe, but also communicating to Americans what are the strategic priorities that you mentioned earlier from a security perspective, where we should be focusing our attention and energies. You are in a difficult world because you're dealing with many different constituents, many power bases in Washington, public perception, and the like. Mm-hmm. How do you leverage these new tools of communication and develop a strategy where you can communicate your priorities clearly and effectively given the diversity of groups that you're speaking to?
It's tough, and I actually was, I did run and win electoral office, so I've been in that world from an electoral standpoint, and I think that I would agree with you that campaigns are fundamentally going to have to change to reach millennials. And that goes for us as well in terms of what we are doing. It means we have to deliver messages through the variety of media that people use. We can't just assume they're going to watch the television and that's what they're going to get and that's what they're going to believe. When we're doing a disaster response or we're trying to do a campaign, see something, say something, you may have seen that at Amtrak, for example, we're looking at lots of different ways that people receive information and, importantly, lots of different ways they can get information to us. So it really needs to be reciprocal. But we are surrounded by news, but so much of it is, as you suggest, there aren't very good filters or screens. One of the things I think we need to develop as a society, and for young people particularly, are what are the screens? How do you really tell what is valid, what has merit, versus what is not valid? And what we are trying to do is say, look, in some situations we deal with where there's a lot of confusion and a lot of what I would call kind of fog of war stuff, where do people go to get accurate information, and then what kinds of media can we make that available through?
One of the things that I think is interesting is what you said, Kristen, about family and friends are the trusted source. Where do you go to get the things that are accurate? One thing I do see and I worry about is that people go to family and friends for the things that they trust, and if that overwhelms the filter as to what becomes accurate in their realm, that the only thing that's accurate is what they've heard from family and friends. Right. Which is usually affirming of your own belief. That where does the diversity of thought come in that?
I think also requires uniquely using the different power bases that we're all involved as leaders in our business lives, in our communities, and the like. And Beth, you talked about when people refer to you as a power woman, you say it's not my power, it's the power of a platform. But a lot of that comes down to the influence and authenticity that you have to use that platform to drive change. So how can leaders in more prominent positions take that role and maybe complement the role of family and friends to be change agents? And is there an example of something you've been able to do to engender that positive change? For those of you people who aren't friends and family with Beth, and if you aren't, you should be.
All my friends and family. And we all have platforms, and that's the great thing. And that's what I think every one of us every day is thinking about. What is that platform? How am I using it? And what kind of change can I create as a result of that? And I think that's where influence really comes from, is just a collection of, no one of us is as good as all of us. So it's really important that we're aware of what each other are doing and sort of all pushing and pulling levers in a direction. Yes, for an example, I just had something, I was just in Singapore the last couple days, and I'll just share a story about how you create change using your platform. So I'm going, I was on an multi-week Asia trip, and I had to be in Singapore, and we were going to have an event with a financial institution, Ernst & Young and a financial institution, an event for some CEOs and broad spectrum of the business community in Singapore. And as many of you in this room know, I came out as a gay woman about 1.5 years ago. So I'm going to Singapore, and I'm told that I'm not supposed to talk about that issue. And I said, oh, really? Okay, I'm not supposed to talk about that issue. It's interesting. I said, well, I want to talk about that issue if I'm asked. Why can't I talk about that? So there was a back and forth. So I go off to Singapore thinking I'm not supposed to talk about that issue. So I, over the weekend, had dinner with one of our LGBT professionals that I know is in Singapore, who had reached out to me to say, I'm here, and when you're here, I'd love to meet with you. So we had dinner. So I got kind of the lay of the land through him of the state of LGBT issues in Singapore. Then met with the financial institution CEO who we were going to do the event that night, the next night together, and got to the end of that dinner, and the topic hadn't come up during dinner, and I said, what about the LGBT issue? Talk to me about that. And she said, I'm told you don't want to talk about that. I said, oh, really? Okay. Well, I would talk about that if you asked. And she goes, well, then I'll ask. I said, well, then I'll talk. So anyway, so we go into that event that night. And of course, she then, it comes up, and that becomes the discussion. In a 2-hour session, 90 minutes is spent on that issue because everybody in that audience wanted to talk about it. And nobody's talking about it. And anyway, so the next couple, so I leave Singapore, and that issue's different than it was. And I just think that's the power of a platform, is thinking intelligently about how to use it, building sort of, finding those touch points where you can kind of get a guiding coalition and something that might be sustainable when you leave. And so I don't know, it's a combination of stuff, but that was a recent example.
And I think we're living in a unique time where those lines are blurred. Your personal passions, the causes that you champion, often are intertwined with those that you're associated with in your corporate life or the other spheres of your life. Well, so a new dynamic to changing influence.
Just the last thing I'd say about that is I think we sometimes underestimate the ability. Now that was just that's a person going into a country who can say things that our people in that country may not be able to say for whatever reason. And I think it's important to understand that influence as well, as when your platform you can use or your network can be influential in a different setting because it just has a different, it comes in with a different power base in essence than a local setting. And that applies here in the United States too.
Secretary Napolitano, you've had a career throughout politics in a myriad of different roles. How have you been using your different power bases in unconventional ways to drive change?
Well, I remind, when I first ran for office, I'd been the U.S. Attorney in Arizona, and I decided to run for elected office to be the State Attorney General. So this was 1998. And I did my announcement, you know, I'm a prosecutor, I want to be the Attorney General. And a reporter called me up the next day and said, Janet, that was really a great announcement. Now, do you intend to run as a woman? I kid you not, you can't make this stuff up. And I'm like, well, duh. But you know, I think what he was really saying is my agenda going to be different, right? Yeah. Well, I think every leader's program and your priorities are set in part by life's experiences. And so different life experiences are going to result in different priorities. And so when I took office in that job, we had a backlog of 6,000 plus child abuse cases. These were child protective services cases. So they weren't the criminal case, they were finding homes for children who had to be removed. And you know, while they're waiting for that to get resolved, they're in group homes and all kinds of things. Not great places for kids. And by the way, a year or 2 years in the life of a child is a really long time. And so we just moved things around in the office and brought some folks in to really work that issue and find homes, get current, kind of reform the way those cases were handled. And I think that change has lasted in that Attorney General's office ever since. You know, would a male Attorney General have made that a priority? Perhaps, I don't know. But the whole issue about families and children and education are huge issues. So when I became governor, I said, you know, we're a very young state. Contrary to popular perception, Arizona is not an old retirement state. It is a very young state by median age. With a growing, very young population. And I said, we need to have kindergarten and we need to have pre-K in this state. So we really pushed voluntary full-day kindergarten and got it passed through a pretty tough legislature. Then we supported an initiative to put a tax on cigarettes with the proceeds going for early childhood, pre-K. So, I mean, we were really thinking about how do you move, you know, this state forward, how we move the people of the state forward. Now I get in this job, it's a totally different deal. Now I'm dealing with, you know, terrorists, and I'm dealing with cyber criminals, and I'm dealing with every trade and commerce issue you can imagine. And oh, by the way, we protect the President of the United States. It's a little different. And so we've got to really focus on what are our core responsibilities, how do we best achieve them in a way that is intelligent and caring, and what was the third one?
Hardworking. And
hardworking. I can verify the third. And so, and that's what, you know, that's what we strive to do. So to build on your story, Beth, it's not just using the platform, but recognizing that that will change as your career changes, as the position you occupy changes, and your job is to kind of is to lead, is to push, and to pull, and to get a long-term vision moving.
Your platform may change as your career changes, but you can create platforms at very rapid speeds. You don't necessarily need to have an established career in business or politics to become a significant voice or a significant force within the political dialogue. Kristen, I'd love for you to touch on that, because now with organizations like MoveOn.org and the like, instantaneously we can create these very powerful very, very powerful communities that are transforming what it means to be lobbyists, transforming what happens in business, transforming politics and the like. What are your perspectives on that as it relates to potentially more established power bases versus ones that can be established overnight?
So what you've just described is sort of exactly my own path to trying to influence the political conversation. Had I started my career 10 years earlier and started it trying to change the way my party thinks about certain issues, as a 24, 25-year-old kid, nobody in the Republican Party establishment was going to, would have listened to me. But now it's 2013, and if you have an idea that resonates, you can build sort of a following around your idea. 4 years ago, I started blogging at the time it was called Pollster.com. Since then, it's been bought by the Huffington Post. So now it's HuffPost Pollster. And I would write about all of the data around how young voters were behaving and began to get a little bit of attention around it. And from there, from those little seeds of trying to start an idea online and start that conversation going, over the years, I was able to get journalists to pay attention and ultimately get a story in the New York Times Magazine about some of the research I was doing. We had a reporter follow me to, I was doing focus groups in my hometown of Orlando. I went to Columbus, Ohio to talk to young voters. We were able to get that more traditional established attention only after we had, folks who were like-minded, we had all focused on this research and written about it online. So that was, at least for me personally, it was very important. And it does allow, I think that money is, as much as we talk about money in politics these days, I think in a weird way money is becoming less important. There's more of it, but it's less useful because you can get something to sort of penetrate the bubble and then you can get an idea to spread without needing to put thousands of points into a television buy. So in that way, I think this sort of changing landscape is allowing money is no longer power in politics the same way it was because all you need is an idea.
One quick question, speed question to each of you before we open it up to the audience. We all are actively involved in or interested and passionate about the future of this country. I think it's no surprise that there's a lot of frustration about the political process, disillusionment about the ability to be change agents. Very quickly, I would just like each of you to comment on what you think is the most underutilized tool for individual constituents to be a change agent. And even if that may be running for office, which I know very few women I've talked to actively throw their hands in the air to do. So Beth, I'll start with you.
You said most underutilized tool, and where I was in my head when you said that was the most underutilized resources are women legislators that we have today. So I didn't get to the tool. I stopped right there in that, we have 20 women senators, and they work across the aisle so beautifully, and they actually do get things. Steve's quote about, ask a man to say something or ask a woman to get things done. I mean, they get things done. They do. Yeah, but so when the president invited those 20 women senators to the White House a few weeks ago, what I wanted to see was a social media campaign to say, thank goodness, those women, to really publicize. I mean, it was a one-day media story and then it died again, but I wanted to see a social media campaign to point to them and say, they do get things done. Why is that? And I wish there was more of that.
So get more legislators in office as women legislators. Very quickly, each of you.
Just more of them. Sorry.
One way to do it before we turn to a question.
Run for office. There are frustrations and it's hard, et cetera, et cetera. Take the risk and run. You can't win if you don't run.
Kristen?
So we've talked a lot about the power of platforms and what you say, and I think there's also a lot of power in listening, and I think that's something that a lot of folks could do to help their own message. When folks are trying to influence, it sometimes can really help just to know what the people you're trying to influence care about. What are they thinking? That doesn't have to be a focus group or a survey, the kind of research that I do, but I think listening is sort of this underutilized tool that women in particular are very good at, and that I think if we started leveraging that advantage, that could create a lot of positive change.